Parshat, Tazria, chapter 12. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Bnei Israel, instructing, If a woman conceives and bears a male child, then she will be unclean for 7 days. As in the days of her niddah, she will be unclean. In the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin is to be circumcised. She must wait during the blood of purification for 33 days. She is not to touch any holy thing, nor come into the sanctuary, until the days of her purifying are completed. But if she bears a female child, then she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her niddah, and she is to wait in the blood of purification for 66 days. When the days of her purification are completed for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring to the Kohen, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He is to present it before Adonai and make atonement for her. Then she will be cleansed from the discharge of her blood. This is the Torah for her who gives birth, whether to male or female child. If she cannot afford a lamb, then she is to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Then the Kohen will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Chapter 13. Then Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When a man has a swelling on the skin of his body, or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes the plague mark of Zaharat in his flesh, then he shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons the Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the plague of Zaharat on his skin, and if the hair in the plague has turned white, and the appearance of the plague is deeper than the body skin, it is the plague of Zaharat. Thus the Kohen shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. If the bright spot is white in the skin of his body, but its appearance is not deeper than the skin, and his hair has not turned white, then the Kohen is to isolate the infected person for 7 days. The Kohen shall examine him on the 7th day, and behold, if he sees the plague has not spread in the skin, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. The Kohen is to examine him again on the 7th day, and behold, if the plague has faded and has not spread in the skin, then the Kohen shall pronounce him clean. It is a scab. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads on the skin after he has shown himself to the Kohen for his cleansing, he is to show himself to the Kohen once again. The Kohen is to examine him. And if the scab is spread on the skin, then the Kohen shall pronounce him unclean. It is Zaharat. When one has a plague of Zaharat, he is to be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and behold, if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and if there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic Zaharat in the skin of his flesh, and the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. He is to isolate him, for he is unclean. Suppose the Zaharat breaks out above the flesh, and so far as it all appears in the eyes of the Kohen, covers all the skin of the infected person from his head to his feet. And the Kohen will see, and behold, if the Zaharat has covered all of his body, he is to pronounce him clean of the plague. Since it is turned all white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears upon him, he will be unclean. The Kohen is to examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is Zaharat. Or if the raw flesh changes and turns white, then he must come to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and behold, if the plague has turned white, then the Kohen shall pronounce him clean of the plague. He is clean. When the body has a boil on its skin, and it is healed, but in the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a bright reddish white spot, it shall be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine it, and behold, if its appearance is lower than the skin, and its hair is turned white, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of Zaharat that is broken out within the boil. But if the Kohen examines it and sees there are no white hairs within, and it is not deeper than the skin but is faded, the Kohen shall isolate him 7 days. If it spreads in the skin, the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. But if the bright spot stays in its place and is not spread, it is merely the scar from the boil. The Kohen is to pronounce him clean. Or suppose a body has a burn from fire on its skin, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white. Then the Kohen is to examine it, and behold, if the hair of the bright spot is turned white, and its appearance is deeper than the skin, it is zarat. It is broken out in the burning, and the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of zarat. But if the Kohen examines it and sees there is no white hair in the bright spot, and it is not lower than the skin but is faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him 7 days. The Kohen is to examine him on the 7th day. If it is spread in the skin, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of zarat. If the bright spot stays in its place and is not spread in the skin but is faded, it is the swelling from the burn, and the Kohen shall pronounce him clean, for it is merely a scar from the burn. When a man or a woman has a plague on the head or on the chin, and the Kohen is to examine the plague, and behold, if its appearance is deeper than the skin, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a scab, zarat, of the head or chin. If the Kohen examines the plague of the scab, and behold, its appearance is no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair within, the Kohen shall isolate the infected person with the scab for 7 days. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine the plague, and behold, if the scab has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the appearance of the scab is no deeper than the skin, then he shall be shaved, but he is not to shave the scab. The Kohen is then to isolate the one who has the scab for 7 more days. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine the scab, and behold, if the scab is not spread in the skin, and its appearance is no deeper than the skin, the Kohen shall pronounce him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads in the skin after his cleansing, then the Kohen is to examine him, and behold, if the scab is spread in the skin, the Kohen may not look for the yellow hair. He is unclean. But if he sees the scab is stopped, and black hair has grown in it, the scab is healed, and he is clean. The Kohen shall pronounce him clean. Suppose a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, bright white spots. Then the Kohen is to examine them, and behold, if the bright spots on the skin of their body are a dull white, it is a harmless rash broken out in the skin. He is clean. If a man's hair has fallen from his head, and he is bald, he is clean. Or if the borders of his face become bald, his forehead is bald, he is clean. But if on the bald head or bald forehead there is a reddish white plague, it is zarat breaking out on the bald head or bald forehead. The Kohen is to examine him, and behold, if the rising of the plague is reddish white on his bald head or bald forehead, like the appearance of zarat on the skin of his flesh, he is a man with zarat. He is unclean. The Kohen shall definitely pronounce him unclean. His plague mark is upon his head. And the one with zarat who has the plague mark shall wear torn clothes. The hair of his head is to hang loose. He is to cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. And all the days during which the plague is on him, he will be unclean. He is unclean. He is to dwell alone. Outside the camp will be his dwelling. Also, when a garment has a mark of zarat on it, whether it is a woolen or linen garment, whether it is woven or textured, linen or wool, leather, or anything made from leather, or if the mark is greenish or reddish within the garment or in the leather, or in the weaving of the texture, or in anything made from leather, it is the plague of zarat, and shall be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine the plague and isolate it for 7 days. Then he is to re-examine the plague on the 7th day. If the plague is spread in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or the leather, whatever the use for the leather may be, the plague is a destructive mildew. It is unclean. He is to burn the garment or the weaving or the texture, wool or linen or anything of leather in which the plague resides, for it is a destructive mildew. It is to be burned in the fire. If the Kohen examines it, and behold, the plague is not spread in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or in anything made of leather, the Kohen shall command that they wash the thing which has the mark and he is to isolate it 7 more days. Then the Kohen is to re-examine it after the mark has been washed, and behold, if the mark has not changed its color and is not spread, it is unclean. You are to burn it in the fire, whether the rod is inside or outside. If the Kohen looks and sees the mark has faded after it has been washed, then he is to tear it out of the garment, or the leather, or weaving, or texture. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or in anything made of leather, it is spreading. You are to burn with fire whatever has the mark. The garment, or weaving, or texture, or whatever leather item it is that you have washed, if the mark has departed from it, it is to be washed a second time and will become clean. This is the Torah for a mark of zarat in a garment of wool or linen, either in the weaving, the texture, or anything of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean.